Welcome, everyone, to episode number 9 of The Bunker Talk. I have a very special guest that I'm excited to interview here, Michael Wild. He's a managing partner at WFP Law. Thank you so much, Michael, for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? How'd you get there? All that fun stuff.
Sure. I'll fit it into a synopsis. So I'm a father of 2. I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son.
14?
I know, right?
Did you start when you were 14?
Well,
You're so young.
I'm 43. I just have good genes.
Yeah, you sure do.
So what I did was when I was growing up, I always knew I was going to be an attorney. I went to law undergrad at the University of Florida and then felt like I was a New Yorker trapped in Florida because I grew up in New York. So I moved back to New York for about a year. Then I realized I'm a Floridian who just likes New York sports teams. So I came back to the University of Florida Law School. So I'm a double Gator, go Gators.
Okay.
And then came down here, and my friend Tony and I, we wanted to start a law firm together. We knew it was going to be an estate planning law firm. It's always what I enjoyed in law school, estate planning and tax. I never thought that was going to be the case. I was on trial team and did the cross-examinations and the closing statements, and I loved all the LA law and Boston legal and all that stuff. But in real life, litigation's boring. Litigation is just filing things back and forth and settling before you even get to trial. So with the estate planning, I found that to be really interesting. I had a professor, Doug Miller, at UF, and he always brought up these cases, like, for instance, a husband and wife, no children, get hit by a train. The parents of each are fighting each other as to who inherited from whom. We don't know who died first. An eyewitness said husband's head came off and blood was squirting in the air. What does that prove? His heart was still beating.
Oh, my God.
He outlived her. He gets the money.
Oh, my God.
Now, in Florida, now we have a simultaneous death clause, so we don't have to worry about that. But that was so interesting to me. On the final exam, how to hide money from a wife you're about to divorce, things like that. So it was very interesting. And then intro to income tax, how to get around the tax code. So anyway, fast forward, Tony and I say we want to start our own firm. And I said, knowing business, what we need to do is first learn the business of law, not necessarily just the act of drafting and dealing with clients. So we each got jobs at different firms. He got a job at an estate planning firm, actually. I got a job at a real estate firm because I just wanted to be at a small firm in Fort Lauderdale. I wanted to learn what to do and what not to do. I learned a lot of both. And 3 years after, to the day that we started, we put in our notice and started the firm. Now, Tony, about 9 months after we started the firm, ran out of money, moved back to New Jersey, transferred all the shares over to me, and ended up becoming a securities litigation attorney. And so now I had this whole firm to myself, and my first office was a Borders. My second office I bartered for at a maritime architect. And so we used to tell people like, oh yeah, we do admiralty, on the side. And then after that, sublease space from a personal injury attorney. And now we finally have our nice big office in Plantation. So that was almost 14 years ago. And so from that time, all we have practiced.
So all of that and having a baby. Because she's 14.
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, actually, 2009 was when I quit my job, which was a good paying job because we were doing real estate litigation, and 2009 was the height of foreclosure. Yep. So I quit my job at a time where I had just bought a house, just had a baby, and I remember the boss of the firm, the managing partner who took my resignation, she said, we're about to give you a raise. Like, why are you leaving? I said, well, I'm going off on my own. She said, to do real estate? I said, no, to do estate planning. She said, have you ever done estate planning before? I said, no. I said, I'll figure it out.
There you go.
And I remember what she said was, it's hard to get clients. I said, that part I'm not worried about. Mm-hmm. So sales has always been my genes. My father was a salesman. My grandfather was a salesman. So I run a business that just happens to specialize in estate planning, asset protection, and probate administration.
That is so... We're starting off with a bang, honestly, because that is so powerful. Because in my industry, I think, and it's something that I suffer with. I'm a business owner. I opened this agency November of 2019, right before the world ended, right? March 2020, from scratch, started from zero. And I find it that sometimes in my space, there's a challenge of, am I an insurance agent first or a business owner?
Yep.
That is so hard for me personally, because sometimes I'm just like, perfect example, quickly, I'm working on a roofer, right? I gave general liability. He's opening his roofing firm. Great. I offered him a quote that was about 20 grand for his roofing, operations, but there was another one that's 52. And I'm telling him, what the differences are, right? I'm educating him, right? And the one that's the 20, it's not great coverage. So that's the stuff that keeps me up at night. And it's like, am I wearing my insurance agent hat because I want to do what's best, but I don't know that he necessarily cares. And do I walk away if he buys the one with all the exclusions? Because eventually it's my,
Yeah.
Like, how do I do what makes me sleep better at night? Like, oh, if you don't want to buy the one that actually does not exclude the things you're doing, then maybe I'm not the agent for you.
Sure.
But then I got to run a business. It's very difficult for me personally. So what's your advice on that?
Well, I'll tell you. So I found that over the years that the bad clients, not necessarily a client that's uneducated, because you can educate a client, but a client that's obstinate, they'll weed themselves out, And sometimes I'll just say, this is not a fit. Now, I will say there's a little asterisk next to that, because early on in my career, oh man, have money will travel. Yeah, I will.
Money will travel.
I will. I used to do things. I mean, I would go to people's houses. I mean, hey, no problem. I'll come over at 5:30 p.m. What do you got? Oh, it's gonna cost $3,000. Well, I only have $1,500. I'm like, fine, I'll take it. Like, let me go. Yeah. I gotta go home to my baby.
Yeah.
But then as I got busier, and so now, I mean, the phone doesn't stop ringing.
Right.
And not every client is right for our firm.
Right.
So sometimes a client will come in and maybe due to their attitude, for instance, I had, and this is a person who I've never met in person. We get some internet business. Most of our business is referral based, but we get some internet business. And a gentleman called the office and got my voicemail, and then called 10 minutes later and got the voicemail again.
Obviously.
And then called 10 minutes later and got the voicemail again. So he got the voicemail 3 times during the same hour that I was with another client.
Mm-hmm.
When I called him back after that meeting, and I said, oh, I got your voicemail, can we assist you with your estate planning? Yeah. And he said, I called 3 times, and you didn't pick up. And I said, well, I was with the same client during that time. He says, well, I want my attorney to pick up my call whenever. I said, let me ask you, when you're at the doctor's office and you're getting an exam and somebody calls for that doctor, does he leave the middle of the exam and go pick? Yes, I want him to. I said, well, I don't think you're right for our firm then. I don't think this is a fit. And I said, you should find an attorney that's less busy than I am, that can sit around and wait for your calls.
Right.
So sometimes they have to weed themselves out.
Sure.
Sometimes it's better to not make that money.
Sure.
Other times, there's also an inconvenience cost. So sometimes a person will come in and I'll say, this is going to be a nightmare client.
Yes.
Nightmare client. And so I will say to them, I will quote them something I don't want them to pay.
Right.
And then if they pay, I'll be like, oh shit, I sold my soul. All right, whatever, let's go.
I gotta do it.
Yeah, but so that's that's now obviously with an established business. Early on, sometimes you take the client that's the wrong client. In this case though, so I have clients all the time that come in and they think, oh, I need a will. Oh, my estate's the famous last words. Oh, I have a very simple estate. And I say, well, what's your estate? Well, I own 2 businesses, 3 pieces of real estate. I've got kids from 2 different
4
marriages.
stepkids, yeah.
I want to, one of them special needs. Okay, I was like, what is simple about this?
Nothing
simple. So famous last words are, I have a simple estate. But the good thing is when they come in, we always do a free consultation. And I always tell them, I say, forget about what you think you need. Tell me what your goals are. What are the goals? I'm going to tell you how we get to the goals. And so I think that's the key also. When you're talking about your same exact example, ask the guy, what are your goals? Like, what are the goals about, what do you want this insurance policy to do? If, for instance, I gave a good thing about insurance, like just to even personal lines insurance, sometimes, like for me, I choose a higher deductible.
Right.
Where somebody might say, oh my God, you're going to pay $10,000 out of pocket if you have a house issue? I go, yeah, I will, because I'm not going to file a claim under $10,000 because they'll drop me and then they'll raise the rates.
Right.
So I might as well go with a higher deductible. It's fine. With a vehicle, same thing. I'm not going to put in the claim unless it's a total of a car.
A catastrophic loss. Yeah.
So same thing with health insurance also. So I look at those things, and maybe somebody would look and go, oh my God, you're paying too much on it. But I'm like, no, but that's what I want. As opposed to maybe they don't know. So maybe this gentleman says, oh, it's apples to apples, 20,000 versus 52,000. And you're like, no, it is not.
Yeah, that's why it's I have a more educational approach to this. And I think that's kind of what I need to work on as far as like, but I'm growing a business. It should be business owner hat than insurance agent. Yeah. Like you said, I'm a business owner that runs an insurance agent that happens to sell insurance. And so that's kind of just what I did. Like I laid it out for him. I said, listen, these are the 4 major exclusions that I'm concerned with. I think we need to talk, because he did tell me he was working with another agent. I do have some of those questions. It was a referral where I weed them out too. Like if I'm the 3rd agent, I'm out, because there's just the market's blocked already. Like
Yeah.
it's saturated. So, he did tell me I'm working with someone else. And I said, listen, my proposals that I'm showing you and I'm educating you, I'm letting you know all insurance is not created equal.
Correct.
So if you are considering someone else, that's fine. Show it to me and I will let you know how it matches up to what I'm offering you.
Sure.
And I do enjoy that because I feel like that's what also makes me feel good as like a human being that, I care. He's investing all his money, opening this roofing company. Like it matters to me that it's done properly, but I guess I can't care more than they care.
Well, here's the thing. You know what ends up happening, and this happens a lot even in my business. So we always offer free reviews of estate plans because a lot of times people set it and forget it.
Right, and they need to update it.
Yeah, and someone comes in and they're like, oh, here's my estate plan. I already had it done. It's from 1978. You know?
Right.
It's like, no. Yeah. So that sometimes, but there are times where I'll review a plan. I'll say, this looks great. This I know the attorney that drafted it. They do a good job. Have there been any changes in your life? No. Are you taxable? No. We don't need to update anything.
Great.
And so I'll look at it and I'll say, hey, this looks great. You're as long as you fund the trust, you're in great shape. And they'll say, okay, how much do I owe you? I say, nothing. Nothing. You gave me the opportunity to review it. We're good. And you know what always happens? They come back. Yep. Because they come back when they need changes. Or they come back when they send me their friend.
Or they refer,
or somebody dies. And then they come back and I handle the administration. Because running a business isn't just that moment. It's not just that. So this gentleman, for instance, if he says, hey, I've got another person that's offering me this $20,000 insurance policy, and you're offering a $52,000 one, I want to go with the $20,000 one because obviously I save a bunch of money. Then all of a sudden a claim comes in.
Right.
And he gets screwed. And he's like, I should have listened to you. And he comes back, and from now on, you're his insurance agent. So sometimes it's a long-term play.
Sure.
Hopefully you can educate them initially, but sometimes I can't. It's very rare in my business for someone to just do a will, because especially the first time I talk to them on the phone, I say, a will does nothing. Like a will, it goes through, every will goes through probate. People think it doesn't. They think it avoids probate. It does nothing. If you have beneficiary designations, it's good not even to go through the will anyway. So what's the point of having the will except to appoint a guardian for your minor child if you happen to have a minor child? So, but when I did have a client that she's an older client and she demanded to just do a will, and this happened maybe over 13 years, maybe 5 times. Someone's like, no, I just want a will-based plan. And every time I make them sign a letter.
Right.
And the letter basically says, I didn't listen to Mike. I'm an idiot. If something happens, he's off the hook. Yeah. So
you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, look, we haven't even gotten to that part, and I don't think we have the time to get to the part of, because our industries are kind of going through the same thing where people believe that they could just do it themselves online.
Yeah.
And that's a disaster also. But that's also not our client, right?
Correct.
They don't value your expertise, your advice, your care. That's fine. Then you can just do it online and then hire you when it's time to fix it.
100%. In fact, I remember a few years ago, an associate of mine got scared because he said Costco is doing wills now. And I said, we don't want any client that is going to use Costco for their estate planning. No offense to Costco. I use them for my supplies.
I was going to say, listen, Costco, you could buy a casket.
I love, yeah, exactly. The Kirkland golf balls are my golf ball of choice. So I love Costco for many things. Yeah. Estate planning is not one of them.
They sell insurance too.
Yep.
And I know our insurance agent chats are like, our Facebook groups are going crazy because like Amazon's selling insurance and all that. It doesn't matter. They're not. There's always going to be a population that's transactional, and they usually come back to the traditional method when it goes wrong.
Yeah.
It's like they think they can do it, but then they come back.
Yeah.
So it's just, and then when they come back, it's better for us.
Absolutely.
Because they stay.
And then they stay forever. It's true.
They stay. Well, I didn't expect to kick it off like this, but let's get into it. Thank you. This is really good advice. And it's, the more I'm doing the show, I realize that, attorneys and our professions, the insurance agency world, are pretty similar with the threats we're facing, as far as, hard to find staff, capable staff that can pay attention to detail. I mean, your industry, I think, is a little sexier than ours. So it's kind of like
death.
Yeah. Well, no, maybe not that your area of practice, but just being an attorney, I mean, nobody wants to be an insurance agent. Like we are. In all the polls, we're like literally a notch above car salesmen. So it's not like the flashy industry to be in. So it's actually creating a challenge to attract talent into the industry. So, but I'm learning, that we're facing similar challenges, and it's always nice to learn from other people outside of my sphere, because I can learn from you and apply those things into my business. So I am going to get to some questions about your business side of it, but You touched it a little bit on why you went into this area of law. Tell me give us the 60-second wrap up on wills, estate planning, probate. Sure. Like, what's the main differences and why is one better than the other without legal advice, obviously?
No, absolutely. So, first I'll tell my professor, Doug Miller, estate planning professor, he wrote on the board the first day, it's what happens to your shit when you die. but to really expand on that, so what estate planning is who's getting what, who's doing what, and what kind of restrictions or protections you want to put on it. So when we talk about basic estate planning, there are 7 basic documents that everyone needs. We call them the under the bridge documents. Mm-hmm. If you live under a bridge, you still need
them. Okay.
And we're talking about power of attorney, healthcare surrogate, HIPAA release, advance directive, pour over will, assignment of tangible property, and the revocable trust. And the revocable trust, a lot of people think that a revocable trust that's for rich people, right? Well, people don't really probate, which, and by the way, I know you understand because we talked about this, what probate is, but a lot of people don't know. Mm-hmm. And most people only have to deal with one in their life because the spouse deals with it first and then the kid deals with it next. Probate is the transfer of assets from the deceased to the beneficiaries through the court system. Any asset owned by the decedent, the dead person, that's going to be transferred has to go through a probate process that's going to take anywhere from, if there's no challenging, 6 to 18 months. And it's going to cost between 7 and 10% of the estate when you take everything into account. Not just the attorney's fees, but creditors and things like that. We can avoid all of that by using a revocable trust. So a revocable trust will keep assets out of probate at a bare minimum. Probate starts at $75,000. So if you have $75,000 of assets, or more, you're going to have to
everything's
go through probate.
Going to probate.
You're going to probate.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are certain accommodations for homestead property and things like that. But when you have, non-homestead real estate, business interests, those are the ones that are the most important to not have go through probate because they'll have overhead. What happens to a business if you can't manage that business for 6 to 18 months? It dies. It dies on the vine. What happens to real estate, especially rental real estate, if you're not legally allowed to collect rents, if you have issues where you can't, pay taxes or, renew insurance? Because when your insurance, when the person dies, they're like, we were insuring them, not you. So now you have to requalify. Yep. Well, how can you do that unless you own the property?
Nobody owns it. Yep.
So is a big issue. So what we always do as a bare minimum is a revocable trust. So I would say those documents are a first level of the pyramid of estate planning. Now, the smallest client I have probably has a $50,000 net worth, and the largest client I have is $2 billion. So we do everything in between, and then sometimes we get advanced, and I won't bore everyone on the podcast with the things like the family limited partnerships and the GRATs and the CRATs and the ILETs and things like that. But there are opportunities for protecting kids from, like, for instance, my kids, I protect them from themselves until they're age 30. Right. They can't make those financial decisions. They have to ask the trustee for permission. Mm-hmm. And then even beyond age 30, I have a dynasty trust, which protects them from divorce, creditors, litigation, bankruptcy, things like that. So those are very popular things to do, for especially if you have kids.
Yeah. I feel like, so I had told you off air, we went through this with my mom's parents, with my grandparents, and my parents both worked for corporate America. We weren't rich, when we were little, but they had nice house. They had worked all their life, salespeople. My mom worked for Equifax, all her life. They made a decent salary. Yep. We lived a regular life, right? And I remember sitting at the dinner table and I knew that we had our insurance with State Farm and that the girl that we spoke to there, her name was Alexandra. It was part of my conversations. I would hear them talking about it, right? We were not in the insurance space yet. But so I considered my parents relatively educated when it came to that, even though they didn't know about high income stuff, right? Or what the wealthy do or anything like that, right? Even as average Americans, I knew we were somewhat responsible. Like my mom had insurance on her jewelry, sure. Those types of things. But I never, ever, ever heard about this until we lived it. And it's so unfortunate to see what happens to all of the hard work of, in my case, my grandparents. And I saw my mom go through it. And it's not even about the money, really. Sure. It's the stress that is put on a grieving family when someone is dying.
Sure.
And the high pressure, the stress that breaks the bonds in between the family. And then this person that has passed away worked all of their life to accumulate all these things, to leave a legacy, to pass it on, and it's gone.
Yeah.
It's painful. And I when we used to do homeowners insurance, I would have that conversation with people every day. Tell me about your family. Mm-hmm. I would ask them, the stepkid situation. Okay, well, have you guys talked about what happens if there's an accident? And how do you divide it? Who gets what? Because it's just going to be a war and nobody's going to get anything.
Yep.
So all of this stuff that you're doing, you're breaking your back, working, all that stuff, it evaporates, really.
Absolutely.
It's so tragic. So I wish that there was like more education around this, for the public, because most people that are not wealthy think they don't need it. And that could not be further from the truth. If anything, they need it more.
No, I completely agree with you. So and you're right, because those are the ones that fight the most.
Right.
In fact, I always say that probate is very similar to divorce.
Yes.
In the fact that you're dealing with loss.
Right.
I've been divorced. And so a lot of times my friends, when they first get divorced, they say, oh man, I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing. I feel like, I should try again. I said, no. What you're feeling is a feeling of failure. It's a feeling of loss. It's not that the marriage was good. Nobody gets divorced if a marriage is good. It's the feeling of loss or failure. So this is the same thing. Right. So now the kids come in and they're like, oh, we're sad mom died. And now they start fighting over sentimental things. Right. It's not always it's the cash. Right. The cash can be easily divided. We know here's the statute. Here's what happens. Just like in a divorce, we know where the money goes. But wait a second, what percentage of that business goes to me versus you? I was working in it, you weren't. Mm-hmm. What percentage of the jewelry? Well, you're female, I'm male, so you think you should get all mom's jewelry? That's not fair. What about if my wife wants some? Mm-hmm. What about my daughter wants some?
Oh gosh, and then the spouses, that's a whole other.
Yeah. And well, that's the big thing. I tell every client, because my rule with my clients when I'm doing estate planning is there are two things we're going to avoid. We're going to avoid ambiguity, and we're going to avoid surprise, because those are two things that cause litigation. Mm-hmm. If you are ambiguous in your documents, you say, oh, well, I leave it to my son and he'll give out whatever he wants. No way. And if we're doing surprise.
Do you want him to be hated?
We're like, hey, like I have a lot of NFL clients, and so I've got actually celebrity clients in general, and there tends to be maybe out of wedlock children. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, don't put them in there. I'm like, no, because that's surprise, because then they show up and they go, oh, dad died, I get a piece. And that's a pre-terminated child. So that's a big problem too. So I will explain that those two things are not an option. When I'm handling a probate, so now it's at need. Now they weren't my client when they were alive. Then I feel like I have to use my parenting skills. And I've actually had to do this where the same way I negotiate a fight between my daughter and my son over a toy or a show or whatever it might be that they want to do, I have literally had adult, older than me, people in my office, and I've had to put a number behind my back and have someone guess the number, and then they get to choose the first piece of jewelry, and then the next person gets to choose the next piece, and that's what happens. So it's the littlest thing. So when clients say, "Oh, my kids, they'll never fight like that," maybe it's not your kids. Maybe it's who they married to. And this is, to my credit, my stepfather. He and his brothers, they're all very close, and their parents passed a few years ago. And when they all went to the house to box things up, all the wives were there, and the wives all get along, and the brothers all get along, but they all started saying things like, oh, I would love that painting, or I would love that silverware. And the brothers all said, be quiet, stop it. We're not at that point yet. And that was smart, because that's why when we're doing a probate administration, I will tell the client, you grieve, we'll handle this. Make it more about the lawyer. I'll tell people all the time, I say, if your brother or sister or niece or nephew is calling you, bothering you about when am I getting my stuff, I said, tell them to call the lawyer. Right. I will talk to them. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how their tone changes when they're talking to the lawyer instead of talking to their aunt.
Of course, because they can't guilt them.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that, especially when there's sudden death, it's so much worse, right? Sure. Grief is grief. It's terrible. But when you have a sudden death and you're unprepared, I think that the grieving process is so important that to prepare to make it as easy as it could possibly be without all the tension and the stress. It's so important. What do you think is the biggest obstacle? Why do people avoid doing this? Outside of education, right? There's a lot of people that just don't understand how crucial it is. Outside of that, like what are I know some people are superstitious. Like they don't want to talk about it.
So it is funny. I have had, especially Latin American men.
Yes.
Latin American men. I have had them come in. I had one time where the wife was ready to go. She had all the documents. The husband had not even yet come to the office. he finally came to us. He's sweating. He's walking around, pacing. And he's like, I'm so scared that if I sign these documents, I'm going to die next week. And I said, well, listen, if you're going to die next week, you better sign these documents as quickly as possible.
All the more reason.
Yes. And then one time I had this woman, she was young. She was like 35 years old. She was, I think, a veterinarian or a pharmacist. And she's sitting and she starts tearing up talking about it when we're discussing who's going to get what after she passes. And I said, are you okay? She said, it's just hard to think about my own death. Mm-hmm. And I reached across the table and I grabbed her hand and I said, the death rate in Florida is 100%.
It's going to happen.
Yes. It's not an if, it's a when.
Right.
So the only question is, are you going to prepare? Right. Just like with insurance. Mm-hmm. Look, when we talk about, and we'll talk in a little bit, I'm sure, about asset protection, when I do prenups and postnups for business owners, and someone says, well, I don't want to do a prenup. It's not romantic. I said, neither is car insurance. You need that. Yeah. You get in a crash and you don't have car insurance.
I mean, neither is
like,
a business.
I should have had that. Yeah.
I feel like we kind of went through that with selling life insurance when we used to. Like, people just didn't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it because you're going to jinx me and I'm going to die. And it's just like, well, that's not how that works. But it's unfortunate that people have to go through it to then really, really understand and take the time to sit down and have these hard conversations. And like you said, it's like the people that need it the most don't do it. Yeah. The ones that have the stepchildren or have spouses that maybe are involved in choosing things, those types of scenarios, they don't want to have those conversations because they could, what they would want to put down might be offensive. Yeah. Right. Like maybe the wife thinks she's going to get it all and he's going to leave it to someone else. And then it creates a problem that they just don't want to deal with.
It happens like that all the time, where it's a fear sometimes of who's getting what, who's doing, or they think they've done it. Like, a lot of times they actually think they have prepared because they have a will, or because they have beneficiary designations, or because they think like, oh yeah, the worst thing, like, if I were to do a top 10 mistakes people make trying to do their own estate planning, number one would be putting their kids on their deed. And they don't even think about it. They're like, oh, well, how do we avoid probate? Well, that's easy. I don't need estate planning. I'll just put my son on my property. Okay, well, what you just did there was you just lost half your homestead exemption. You just increased your property taxes because with a new owner, now you have a new assessment. You just created a capital gain situation because now when your son goes to sell the property, they don't get the new cost basis. They get the old cost basis. So all these, plus a gift tax situation because it's over $17,000 that you've given to somebody. So there are all these issues that are caused. I'd rather it go through probate. Probate, all right, maybe it costs $4 or $5 grand, but at least it's not, you're not having all these tax issues. Right. So sometimes people try to do it themselves. It's the worst possible thing. But it's funny though. They think like they heard something at a seminar, or their friend, their neighbor. I remember I was telling somebody, this woman, and again, it was a non-client. It was someone who called up. They sent me their documents to review. Major issues with the documents. I mean, just like the documents were so poorly drafted. I don't think an attorney actually did it. I think they did it on like LegalZoom or something. And I told the woman all these issues. I said, you should come in and we should really do it the right way. She said, well, my neighbor said it looked fine. Oh, God. I was like, okay, good. As long as your neighbor said it, as long as your neighbor said it was fine. Yeah. So it's like, so those things do happen. I would say that once a person comes in to the office and they actually sit down with us, our closing rate's 100%. Yeah. Like nobody ever leaves. Our pricing is fair because everything we do is flat fee. Mm-hmm. Our turnaround time is usually 2 weeks, which is much faster than most estate planning attorneys. And honestly, I'm the oldest person at my office at 43, so people tend to like that there's people that will outlive them to do their estate planning.
Right. Yes. Oh, that's actually a really good point. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, because they trust you. Yeah. And they want you to be the one to handle it.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't want it to be that's where, important. Like, if I die first and then all of a sudden it's...
Then they get passed on to someone else. Yeah, that's really important. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah. All right. So what is estate planning, versus asset protection? Sure. Like who needs the asset protection? Do we need both?
Absolutely. So estate planning and asset protection do have some overlaps, just like I mentioned where, after death, how my kids automatically, like what I've given them is better than even a prenup because the assets that I'm leaving them in trust are protected from anything they might face. It's not even their asset ever. So if they get sued or there's a divorce, it's not even part of it. But then we go to pre-need and at-need asset protection right now. So when I say pre-need and at-need, pre-need, most of my clients are pre-need. They come to me and they say, I'm worried about this. Now, asset protection can start as easy as I have a rental property. It's in my own name. I've heard I should put it in an LLC.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You should, because if somebody slips and falls,
Right.
there's a lawsuit. They're going to sue the person that owns the property. The person that owns the property is you. They're going to sue you for your money. If it's the LLC, they can only get the insurance, and then that's where they're capped out. So the personal injury attorney that's a little thirsty, they can't go beyond the LLC. So that's important. So that's bare minimum. But then we go a little bit higher than that. So then we talk about business owners. Deal with a lot of business owners. They come in for succession planning and for asset protection. So that's why we're doing both. And for tax protection when it comes to those who are above the estate tax exemption. When we talk about asset protection for them, it's a number of components. So first thing I'll say to them is, what documents do you have? And they'll usually say nothing. And so if they have a partner, especially, I call this the upside down pyramid. And every business owner is guilty of this at some point. You start your business how? By going on to Sunbiz and getting your name, and you go on GoDaddy and you get your domain, you call your CPA and you get your tax ID number, and then what we become is the equivalent of the game show contestant in the tube where the money's flying around and you're just trying to grab as much as you possibly can. There's no business plan or anything. It's just let me grab it. It's shoving money in my shirt. And at the end of each month, you're like, oh, in the black again. All right.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, 5-6 years passes and you're really successful and you're like, oh crap, my company's worth $15 million.
When did this happen?
And you're like, and I've got no protection out there. So I will then look at them and say, okay, the bare minimum that every business needs. You need an operating agreement or partnership agreement. You need a buy-sell agreement in case somebody dies, becomes incapacitated. And it's not just about death or incapacity. It also involves divorce, bankruptcy, things like that, or even just retirement, or sale of shares. So you need to have those. Prenup or postnup, depending on if they're getting married or have been married. So you need those documents. And you need the estate planning because we don't want the business going through probate. So you have those things. That's the bare minimum. Then I look at, okay, what type of business is it? Now, if it's a business like mine, or yours, we're service professionals. It's not really much liability other than what we're doing. So if my documents are bad, I'm getting sued either way. There's like no further protection other than insurance, E&O insurance, liability insurance, that's going to protect me. But I have a lot of clients who sell pharmaceuticals, work in electrical engineering, they have construction. Those people, they have different levels of liability. So now we're talking about, okay, where are you going to be sued? And this is where I look at and I say, oh, you have people driving trucks, right? So you have the trucks are on the road all the time. And yeah, if it's during working hours and on a job, they're gonna connect it as an agency with the business. But do your people ever take the trucks home? Yeah, all of them do. Okay, so they go to Publix in those trucks. They go to their kids' soccer game in those trucks. So if they back into somebody off the clock in that truck, they're suing the owner of that truck. So I have a very close friend who actually owns a children's healthcare company in Texas and many locations. And one of the things with him that I told him when he first started his business, he had these school buses picking up kids who have like illnesses.
Insurance nightmare.
Yeah, big time. And so I made him segregate the school buses into a separate company. And that way the school buses would be leased on a at-need basis. All of the school bus drivers, all of the school buses, separate entity that his company would pay for the use of. That one of the school buses crashed into a car with a woman who was pregnant with twins, sent her into early labor.
Oh my God.
Thank goodness the babies were born healthy and there was no issue. But we were on the phone that week a lot. And because we had segregated those buses into a separate agency, it saved him any threat of being sued at the main company level. Now, could he have lost the school buses? Sure. They could sue for the school buses, but that's not what they're looking for.
But it's segregated.
It's segregated. Right. And so what we do is we separate that. So I usually like to separate into, we talked about the PEO earlier. I like to almost do a segregated, like self-funded PEO where your employees are not your employees.
Right.
They're employees of an LLC that's a subsidiary. Obviously, the easiest one is real estate. If you own the building that your business works in, you don't want it in the same as your business. You want to lease it from them. It's also better for tax purposes.
Sure.
More deductions. So all those things, vehicles, equipment, employees, and we just separate those. And that way, if something bad happens, we just cross off that list.
Right. It's one piece of it.
And the company still exists. And the cash can stay at the top. So, because the liquid, there's no liability with a bank account,
Right.
or a brokerage account. So we have that, and so we'll set that up, and I'll set that up for business owners. I set it up for myself, even from an asset protection standpoint, where I have my own kind of sole business where it has multiple members and it has any unsecured assets in it. So we, from an asset protection standpoint, even when someone comes in and says, well, what do I have? I don't have marital protection because I'm not married. How can I protect myself? We do that as well. So that's pre-need. We do a lot. So now people come in pre-need. It's great because we have every option available to us.
You get to build it and cater it according
Exactly.
to what they want, their goals. Like you said, ask them what they want.
Well, and
What's
it's
their
funny.
expectation.
I also remember this one story that was a perfect example where it wasn't even about creating new entities, but rather about seeing a liability issue. I had a client. He sold his business in the last couple of years, but he had a company locally, and they were killing it. I mean, like $50 million value and stuff like that. Young guy, 30 years old. And I went to his office one time to have him sign a life insurance trust. And I walk in, and all these dogs jump on top of me. And I'm like, what? I'm wearing a suit and everything. I'm like, what is going on? And big dogs, little dogs. I mean, there were pit bull and chihuahuas and all these. And I say to him, hey, what's with all the dogs? So he says, well, we're young, everyone in here's in their 20s, and so we're really pet friendly, and so we let everyone bring their pets in. And I said, hey, you know something? And I see as an insurance agent, you know exactly where I'm going. So you know something? Your commercial insurance policy does not cover any injury due to any of these dogs. And what I'm talking about is it could be an injury like one dog hurts another dog. It could be a dog hurts another person. Could be somebody trips over a dog. It could be the mailman gets scared of the dog and falls down the stairs running away. Any of those situations happen, and your insurance is going to say, sorry, excluded. He says, so what are you trying to say? I said, get rid of the dogs. so he got rid of the dogs. Next time I was in the office, there were no dogs. So funny. 3 weeks later, a homeless man that was always lived around their block by their office because they were in a commercial area, filed a lawsuit against them because he got bit by a dog, and they said that they always saw a bunch of dogs being walked that belonged to that company. They had gotten rid of the dogs, and so the lawsuit just terminated. So just even something like that.
Yeah.
So that's pre-need. So then we also do at-need. Now here's the other misconception. When we talk about estate planning, we talk about the misconception of, I don't have enough money, I don't need it. With asset protection, when someone gets sued, when either something happened like a car accident or a lawsuit's filed or even a judgment's against them, everyone who has watched a TV show or heard a radio show or something like that, and they say, you can't do anything. Can't do anything now. Fraudulent conveyance, you can't do anything now. Totally false. We deal with at-need protection all the time. Okay. The key is we can't use every option. Every case is different. So if you have a situation where something just happened, but you haven't been sued yet, maybe you won't. Maybe the insurance is just going to pay, and that's it. Like a car accident. Hey, you have the insurance.
You got lucky.
Yeah, you got 100, 300, whatever, and they're paying out, and it's fine. It's fine. And then you have a situation where it might be a business, like, hey, I think this business is about to go bad, or back in the day, foreclosure. Hey, I'm about to miss my payment. I don't know what to do. And there's still a lot of options, but as we go more along that path, there's less options. And so then let's say you have a judgment against you. It's like, what can I do? Well, I will flat out tell a client, especially if they have a judgment already against them, you're going to write a check. We're just going to try to reduce that check. Yeah. Because what people don't realize is, like, you can look at the law and you can say, okay, the law is, here's the timetable, injury happened, you can't move any assets. Yeah, sure. Okay, but that's not how lawyers work. The lawyer that's taking the lawsuit is working on a contingency. And that person wants to collect as much money as quickly as they can. That person is not going to spend their own money going through the process of trying to undo your LLCs or your partnerships or your trusts or anything like that. So there needs to be some legitimacy to it, though. You can't just say, okay, I gave everything to my brother. Sorry, so I don't have anything. They're going to flip that around right away. But if you have a legitimate reason, most of the time estate planning, for setting something up that also gives you asset protection, yeah, the other side's going to say, yeah, it doesn't smell right. But it doesn't matter, because as long as you're willing to write a check, but it could be less than what you owe, then you can come to some settlement. If a client is saying, no, I don't want to write any check, I go, you're not. It's not going to work. You're not thinking straight. But I've coached my clients to the point where one of my coup de grace was I had a client that came to me with a $20 million judgment, and we got it settled for $600,000.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So It's, things
Wow.
like that. But he was willing to pay. He was willing to pay.
Right.
Yeah.
That, that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because, I fell into insurance. I never thought I was going to be a business owner, right? I actually went to the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale for interior design.
My ex-wife went to the same thing. She was an interior designer.
That's kind of why, and I'm selling insurance, couldn't be further from the two, right? But there's so much, people get into business because I always use the restaurant example because I feel like it's one of the best. It's someone's passionate about food. They love their culture. They want to share it with the community. They open a restaurant. Or I make the best pizza. I'm going to open the best pizza shop in Fort Lauderdale, right? That's why they do it. There's so much that people that fall into business that they just don't know.
Yep.
They just don't know. And there's so many things on a list of when you start a business, right? Like even, oh my gosh, when I had David Bennett on, the cybersecurity that you have to run your business, to protect yourself. I recently just had some trademark attorneys.
Yep.
My gosh, we made the mistake, which I fixed because I'm trademarking myself right now. But, I went out to Sunbiz and I saw, oh, this name isn't taken. There you go.
Yeah.
I guess it's available. No.
Yeah.
There's just so much that, and it's our third time doing it, and we had never done it before.
Yep.
So many people just get into business and have no idea about what they really need to protect themselves, which is why, one of the reasons why I started this, right? To help, people like yourself that are so willing to give of your time and your advice and help, the people that are just starting or are 5-6 years in, like you said, and then they wake up and they're worth so much money and they don't know how or where to go, or now it's like, where do I start?
Yeah.
That's another feat, right? And then juggling employees and customers, and
I know being a business owner is not for everybody.
It's not.
I actually, one of my probably my favorite. Actually, it is my favorite business book is the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. Have you ever read that?
No, I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
It's so one of the more famous stories in the book, and then they actually spun it off into like the E-Myth Attorney, the E-Myth CPA. Like it's kind of cool. But one of those famous stories is kind of what you described with the restaurant. It's a woman who makes the best pies in the world. And all she wants to do, she loves making pies, and everyone who tastes it says, this is the best pie I've ever had. So she starts a pie shop, and then as she is starting her pie shop, she spends all her time hiring, firing, paying bills, doing advertising, doing marketing, sweeping the floors, doing everything. She has no time to make pies.
She doesn't make pies anymore.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's funny, I do the other side of it. I say, whenever I hear someone say, find something you love to do, it's like, okay, listen. I guarantee there's not a lot of 5-year-olds saying, I want to sell commercial insurance and I want to do estate planning. Although my daughter is 14 and she is trying to become an estate planning attorney so she can take my firm over. I welcome it. I want to play more golf.
Yes.
So,
yeah, that's amazing.
So, but most of the time, you don't find those goals. Find something you're good at.
Right.
So for me, I'm really good at estate planning and asset protection, but I became good at it over years of experience. It's like the 10,000 hour rule,
Right.
So you're by doing it over and over, you become really good at it. But it's even more important to be really good at running a business. The best compliment I ever got was, I remember this woman who I was doing her estate planning, and during the signing, she said, "You're really not like an attorney. You're like a business person." And I said, that's the best compliment you could possibly give me. There are a lot of broke attorneys out there.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of crappy attorneys out there. But the idea of being able to be both, of being able to be a good professional, but also be a good business person, to put the steak with the sizzle, that's important, and that's really the key to success. I mean, if you start a business because you like it, or you start a business because you're good at making the pie, it's not enough.
It's not enough. Yeah, that's really good. So, 14 years you've been with your law firm. Tell me about your networking. Give me some networking advice, because I know you do a lot of networking. Sure. What can you tell someone that's just starting their business, or maybe they've been in business, but they've always gotten referrals and now they've dried up and now they need to go look for business? What do you give me some advice? What do you think is a couple tips?
I will tell you, so networking is relationship driven, obviously. Now, when I started my law firm, we have obviously no business. I started with nothing.
Right.
It wasn't like going like when you're a commercial litigation attorney and you leave with some clients. I had 0 clients. And my first thought was, okay, maybe I'll walk up and down Las Olas and hand out business cards. I didn't even know. But what I wanted to do, what I knew, and my business plan to this day, is keep overhead low and be everywhere. So what I would do is I would go to anything I was invited to. I would have 3 breakfasts, 2 lunches, 4 cocktail hours. I didn't care. From 7 in the morning until 9 at night, that's what I was doing. I'd try to get home by 8:30, 9 o'clock so I could put my kids to bed, but I was just everywhere. And my plan was, after a certain amount of time, I won't have to do this as much. And that happened faster than I thought. I actually thought it would take 10 years. I think it took about 5. But what I did was I started just going to everything. And then I weeded some things out.
Right.
So I started out going, like, for instance, you start going to these for-profit ones, BNI, NPI, the chambers, all these different ones. And you join them and you meet a bunch of people and you make connections, and you figure out, and the most important thing to figure out is who really sends you business. Because it doesn't make sense for you to, have a referral relationship with someone who will never be able to send you, not because they don't want to.
Right.
But because it's just not.
Yeah, there's some industries that just don't commingle.
Like, in fact, one of my favorite people in the world, she does personal lines insurance. She's a wonderful woman. She's a client of mine. She's in a networking group of mine. And I remember one time was trying to reciprocate because I was sending her a bunch of homeowners insurance. And so and car insurance. And so she said to this woman that she was doing car insurance for, and she said, hey, did you have an estate plan? Because I have a great estate planning attorney for you. And the woman said, "What business is it of yours? Like you're my car insurance lady." So sometimes the referrals flow one way, but not the other, and that's totally fine. Same thing with mortgages and stuff like that. But when it comes to my referral sources, I discovered early on financial advisors were the best. Financial advisors, CPAs, insurance advisors, and other attorneys who didn't do estate planning. So those are the ones I would seek out at all these for-profit events. So that's rule number 1 is figure out who's sending you referrals. Rule number 2 is your time is the most valuable thing. So early on in a business, you have tons of time. I mean, my schedule was wide open. It's funny, as a Gator, I had orange was networking and blue was clients. And I always liked it to be balanced, some orange, some blue. And if I had white, I was like, fill it with orange. Just fill it. If you don't have blue there, fill it with orange.
Right.
So I would just always be making appointments with as many professionals as I could. And then as I got busier, less and less appointments, and then they became more strategic. So then what I did was I started to make cocktail hours with, hey, I'm going to bring a financial advisor, a CPA, and an insurance guy. We're all going to get together, and we're all going to network with each other, make it more efficient and help everybody out. And I became somewhat of a connector because my Rolodex was a mile long of people I had met. And all I cared about doing was helping them. So that's the second tip I would give, is never think about helping yourself when you meet someone. Think about helping them. If I meet someone and they tell me, oh, well, I do commercial cleaning, I go, oh, that's so great, because I know someone who sells commercial real estate. I'm going to connect the two of you, and anytime they sell a building, I'm sure they're looking for a new cleaning company. Boom. That does no good to me except to have connected them. But what it does do over time is it's like business karma. It comes back. Right. Mike's a great guy. Mike knows everyone. You got to be around him. And then it just ends up happening. I mean, the fact of the matter is, like I said, the death rate's 100%. Eventually, somebody's going to need my services that they know. But it's so I would say rule number 2, that is to always be a giver's gain, to borrow the BNI mentality, is always be giving. No, don't be thinking about yourself. And then rule number 3, I'd say, is volunteer your way to the top. Because the nonprofit world is now where I network exclusively. The only for-profit groups that I'm involved in are 6 Degrees, because I love golf, so, at Grand Oaks once a month. And then I have this Wednesday lunch group that it's just a bunch of friends that meet. And
at some point, they end up being your friends. Exactly. Everyone does business together, so it's fun.
It's not anything organized. It's just like, we know we're going to meet there on Wednesdays at lunch. If you can't make it, okay, fine. Yeah.
You don't have to send a sub.
Correct. There's no subs. There's no penalties. There's no letter in the mail.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I've been there.
So there's none of that. But because we want busy people, it's good to be busy.
Right.
So, but everything else is volunteer your way to the top and get involved in a nonprofit community. So for when you're starting out, you probably don't have a lot of treasure, but you do have a lot of time, like I mentioned. So time, treasure, and talent are what nonprofit communities always preach that they're looking for. Early on, I was involved with, tons, like every nonprofit. I told you earlier, I was on 10 nonprofit boards at one point in 2014. I whittled that down. I'm on 6 nonprofit boards right now. And then you get leadership roles over time. So, I'm chairing 2 of them next year. I chaired 1 in the past. I'm on the executive committee of another. And so I really have gotten involved in the Broward County community. And that's the other thing. I like local charities. That's my personal preference. I like local charities more.
Because you can feel the impact here locally, and nothing against obviously the large national ones, but you're driving dollars to our, local community.
Like you don't want to go into like Minnesota, so it can be dispersed from there.
Right.
So I like that. And then so as I started to become involved with the nonprofits from a volunteer level, especially a young professional level at that time, because I was only 30 years old, then I started to get involved at a higher level because of people that I knew and respected. One person, Bob Birdsong, who's a very close friend of mine to this day, he was a client of mine, started as a client, then a golfing buddy, and then all of a sudden, he took a leadership role at 211 Broward, which was one of the first nonprofits that I played an active board member role. He brought me on. He said, "I think we could use you on the board." Brought me in. It was a who's who. I was definitely the smallest house in that cul-de-sac. I mean, It was like you looked around that. Even to this day, it's like a who's who of Broward County, and I was embraced. And I was given a platform because they were so eager to get like young points of view at that point. And then from there, Bob then ended up chairing another group, Handy, of which now I'm the incoming board chair 10 years later or so, where, I joined things because people I respected asked me to. So things that are organizations that I might not have even known about when I first joined, I joined them, but I never said no. It's like that Jim Carrey movie, Yes Man. I never said no. I said yes to everything. And maybe that caused my divorce. I don't know. but I.
That's for another episode.
Yeah, exactly. But I was involved with everything. I was chairing for organization. Like I chaired a March of Dimes big event. I was never involved in March of Dimes. I just chaired it. I like if somebody asked me to this day, actually, I'm still pretty bad about saying no. I pretty much, I'm easy to convince. I say, no, hey, Mike, can you do this for me? I'm like, no, I'm too busy. Come on. Okay, fine. Oh, yeah. Okay, you made a good argument. Yeah. So
come on, is the good argument.
Exactly. So it's very easy to twist my arm into doing things as long as it doesn't take time away from my kids. So so I do. But I would say that early on, when you first start your business and you have all that free time, use it for the nonprofit community. Like volunteer, go to events, join committees. Do all of that. Right. And then as you progress, like even myself now, like I'm in leadership roles now, but I don't have the time for like the little stuff anymore that I used to be, like the event committees and things like that. Right. So now they ask me for a little more treasure and a little less time.
Right.
and that happens over time.
But that's why it's so good that it's a combination of things that make these nonprofits so successful, because like you said at the beginning, you had all the time. Maybe now it's more treasure, less time, but they're filling it with people that have more time.
Exactly.
That's so exactly it's cyclical. Right. Yeah,
that's exactly right, and that's why it's key. And it's what the neat thing is now that I see is with the nonprofit community, my role, because I have now these leadership roles of where I kind of worked my way through the mailroom, and I've seen from different nonprofits how different people do things right or wrong, very similar to how in the for-profit world where I went to a law firm to figure out what they do right and what they do wrong, and some things I took with me and some things I abandoned. I do the same thing with the nonprofits now. Like as I take leadership roles, I'm like, this isn't working. I've seen it work better at this other nonprofit. This works fantastic here. I'm going to borrow this for the other nonprofit, and just kind of making them all better.
I love what you said, because I'm kind of in a weird spot in my industry because it is a heavily male-dominated space, and in the ownership side, it's even worse, right? Most agencies are staffed with the women are the CSRs. Not, even in production, there's not a lot of women that are like 100% commission in production roles. And where the industry as a whole is kind of taking on this diversity and inclusion and equity, project, I guess you can say, or, they're really trying, there's a mission to kind of diversify the insurance industry. And one of the things I always talk about, and I'm so happy that you brought it up and that you said it because it's powerful in that world too, is opportunity. And Bob was his name, the gentleman?
Yeah.
Right. So if Bob wouldn't have given you an opportunity, maybe you would have ended up in that space because you're a good person and you have a good heart. But I mean, would you have taken it to heart the way you did, where you were on 10 boards? And like you said, when you give someone opportunity, no matter the area, no matter the arena of life, giving someone opportunity and giving them an opportunity to rise and say yes. I feel the same way as far as like, I've gotten some opportunities recently where I would have never gone for them myself. Ever would I have put myself out there. But I was presented with an opportunity by a mentor of mine, and I had to say yes.
Sure. Absolutely,
because
100%.
if I don't, not only am I harming myself professionally and my own personal growth, but also what about all the women that are coming after me?
Yeah.
If I said no, when is the next one going to get an opportunity? So in our area, right, in our insurance sphere, which is, we're trying to drive this change. But I love. That's what I have been telling everyone. If you have a rock star, Bob saw something in you and said, you need to be exposed to this world, and you're going to, and he was right.
Yeah.
But you also said yes.
Always. Well, the two things. One of my favorite quotes in the world is, no person is successful without a lot of other people wanting them to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes back to that business karma.
Yep.
The other thing is, there are certain people that you don't say no to.
Right.
And so it's funny because fast forward, as I started to take more leadership roles and people would ask me, they'd be like, hey, see if Bob will write a check to sponsor this. I go, you don't understand how this relationship works. No. He asks me to do things. I don't ask him to do things. Now there are other people I can ask.
So you're a Bob to someone.
So exactly. So I thought about this the other day. I am in this weird range. Like I used to joke about this in the dating world. Like I'm too young to be a sugar daddy, but too old to be a boy toy. So and I feel like I'm that way in the business world too, where I feel I'm going into this realm of where 43 is like to some people very old and to some people very young. And so I'm in this realm where I have people that are in the nonprofit community that look at me like I'm still up and coming. And then I have people that look at me, oh my God, if I could get 5 minutes of his time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool. It's kind of
that
a cool,
is cool. Yeah, that's a cool
weird place to be with.
That's a nice perspective to put it at, because that's also one of the goals of this podcast, because I feel like when people get to a certain point in their business, they feel like they're ready to give back. Yeah. Right? Like they've learned, they know what the mistakes that they made, the things, like you said, they learned what to take and what to leave behind. Yeah. And I think that that's powerful to share. You've shared a bunch just in, this episode. So I really appreciate it. And these are things that we didn't even really talk about, but I think that the power of opportunity is huge, and the saying yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because what good is getting opportunities if you're going to stop getting them if you say no.
Well, and the other thing is, to the other point that you were making about it being a very male-dominated business and things like this. So one thing I've always done also is turn into the spin. If something's going wrong, don't fight against it. Turn into the spin. Like, let's embrace it. Kind of back to my old Gator days, win or lose, we booze, So, things are always coming up. I was thinking, as you were telling that story, what I would do is I would say, I'm going to seek every female business owner and just say, I am one of the few female commercial insurance agents you're ever going to meet. And I'm a female-owned business. Really embrace it. Mm-hmm. And so that's why early on in my career, the thing I have a baby face anyway. Like, thank goodness the gray beard, the gray COVID beard, But before even then, when I was first starting, 30 years old, I looked like I was 19.
Right.
I remember clients came in. It was an older couple came into my office one time, and they said, "We're looking for Mr. Wild." I said, "That's me." They said, "No, your father." I was like, my father's a salesperson. He's the vice president of sales at some other company. I go, "I think you want the lawyer, Mr. Wild, right?" And they're like, "You're so young." And I remember doing the consultation, not saying anything that is that great. Like, I told them how the trust works and avoiding probate and things like that. And I remember the guy, he goes, "Shit, you're smart." And I called the Doogie Howser effect. So I embraced it. I did not fight it and be like, how dare people think I'm too young.
Like, you're disrespected.
I said, I am so young. You want to use me. Why would you want someone old, ready to retire, or die? You need someone young. And then as I get older, I'll be like, why would you use someone young? You need someone experienced. So it's all about who you're talking to and what you're looking to say. But the idea is turn into the spin. There's never any and that's another, like from a sales book, but objections are not objections. You know, someone gives you an objection, you just turn into the spin, make it a 4, take it against and make it a 4.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time, but tell us, give us some good events that are coming up this year, some of your nonprofits that we can support.
There are 2 of the nonprofits that I mentioned, 211 Broward and Handy have amazing breakfasts coming up in May and June. I think it's May 18th is the Handy Scholars Breakfast, and that you're going to see every year with these kids who are at-risk youth that if not for Handy would have been jail or dead or in foster care or wherever they might be. They are graduating. They're graduating from high school or college or graduate school in some cases, and it's just such an amazing celebration. Yeah. And that's going to be that's on May 18th, and then on June 1st is the 211 Making Real Connections Breakfast. That's where we honor people in the community that of all different levels that have done something to support not just 211 Broward, but Broward County as a whole. So, you know, past winners like Greg Hale, who's the president of Broward College, and also was a former board member at 211. We celebrate them that morning, and so those 2 events are coming up. There's also some fantastic events with the Boys and Girls Club. Boys and Girls Club has events every month, so depending on when this airs, there is an event that month. I guarantee it.
Okay,
it just depends on what. Yeah. So if this comes out in, let's see, the next big event is it's going to be after March 25th is Ranch Room, and then in May I think we have our bowling tournament, but there's a bunch of
we'll coordinate, and we can put it in the show notes, and we'll link all the organizations where people can find all the information, and for sure we want to support that, and you know, we want to be able to help you in your efforts with supporting our community. I think it's really powerful. I mean, both sides of what you do is so important, you know. The business side, and then also, you know, all the time that you give to our community, we really appreciate it. And, you know, I think that more people should know people like you.
No, thank you.
I thank you so much for coming. I have to thank David for introducing us, and
absolutely.
I'm going to tell Rich.
Yeah.
I'm excited to let him know, and I'm glad that, thank you so much for making time to be with me here today, and for our audience. And we'll be sure to link all those things that you sent me, all your nonprofits. We'll link them all to make sure that it gets out.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.